Well, thank you all so much for joining us again for the Invisible Americans podcast with Carol Jenkins and my good friend, David Ambroz, who's out in LA. And I'm in the studio in New York. We have a great show with, so many interesting people and topics. And one of them is foster care. And both David and I have been foster parents. I'll just tell my story first because it's shorter. During the mid-'80s, during the AIDS and the drug epidemics in New York City, as well as the rest of the country, I met on a news story. I was a reporter then. I met a small boy that I fell in love with. He was 18 months old, and I and his family had been disrupted, and I became his foster mother, and then several years later was able to actually adopt him. So we were in the system. I understand that much of it as a foster mother and the complications. And he's now a great old, I don't want to call him an old guy, but he's a wonderful man. And I am so happy that I went through that, and he's meant so much for completing our family. My daughter was the one who was always calling up adoption agencies as she wanted a brother. And she got a brother. And that was when she was only 10. So Mike, is a part of our family. So that's my foster care and adoption story. But, David, yours from all ends is, so harrowing and also so wonderful.
Well, I don't think anyone's surprised you raised a daughter that was inquisitive at 10 and calling for resources. So no one's surprised by that, Carol. I grew up homeless for 11 years and in New York City, and experienced from a different angle the world that you describe, where you met your son. I entered foster care, and foster care for me was a very jarring experience. I remember thinking I'm saved, and then I went into a system that was really anything but, and came out of it the other end worse for the wear. I always think about foster care as much of the abuse, but less of the love that my mom provided, with one exception. I had one remarkable family. I never intended to become a foster parent. And candidly, when I was coming out of the system, it was pretty much illegal for a gay man to foster and adopt in most places in the country. So it just wasn't an option. But like yourself, I met a young man in the system who had a lot of anger and a lot of issues, but also remarkable. And I started mentoring him. And then, as these things happen, one thing led to another. And the next thing I know, I am the very thing that I thought I would never be, which is a father. And he is one of four brothers that came into my life, and they are remarkable, challenging, wonderful, all older now. And I'm now also a son. I am a son, but I'm also a father to a toddler. Right. Fostering changed my life, both ends of it, the beginning as one, and now providing that love. The foster care system touches hundreds of thousands of children's lives every year. And for too many of them, the transition out of care is one of the hardest moments of their lives. Understanding what goes wrong and what can go right is essential to changing these outcomes.
Writer Claudia Rowe has spent years examining the foster care system up close. Her book, Wards of the State, The Long Shadow of American Foster Care, is a call to deeper accountability and a deeper commitment to the young people the system is meant to serve.
Claudia, your book started in a courtroom in 2019 watching a 19-year-old named Mary Ann Atkins, who'd grown up in foster care, be sentenced for murder. And I wonder, what was it about that moment that told you this was a book and not just a story?
Two things. The first thing is very ephemeral. It's a physical feeling. And I'm sure anyone who's written a book feels it. There's that shiver of recognition. You just feel this is your book. The reason, I think, is that I knew so much data and research and information about the outcomes from foster care in the lives of young adults. I knew it as data and research. And then suddenly there it was in front of me, some years later. This data had been in the back of my mind for a decade. And then it was all there in Marianne's story. I had not been planning to write a book about foster care. I was looking at youth crime. And then I realized, oh, this youth crime story I'm looking at, this is a foster care story.
Yeah. I mean, talk about data. I think one of the statistics that you talk about, 59% of kids who age out or leave foster care will be locked up by age 26. And that really stayed with me. I came through the child welfare system myself, and that is not a number. Those are faces I remember. And it's utterly devastating to realize it's almost 2/3 of kids. What is this mechanism that is so reliably producing that outcome?
Well, one of the things that's so important to understand is a huge portion of that number you cited, that 59% will have been locked up by their mid-20s. For a great many of them, it's while they're being parented by the state. They're locked up in juvenile detention. And the mechanism for that is, the research in the book kind of lays out 4 paths that are sort of part of almost every adolescent's foster care experience. And they seem to lead right to lockup, and they are running away. Incredibly common behavior, running from a placement. A lot of people don't understand, for many youth, as you know, it's running toward rather than away. You're looking for your parent who might be on the street, or your siblings who you've been separated from, or other kids on the street like you. But you're likely to get hungry when you're out there with no money. You shoplift, you're going to juvie, or you're trafficked, likely going to juvie. So running is a really common experience for adolescents in foster care. Group homes, if you're not adopted or reunited with your original family, group homes. A lot of kids steal from one another in group homes, very violent. Staff call the police, you're going to juvie. So those are 2 mechanisms that are like, while you're still in care, that seem to lead often to lockup. Then broken adoptions. A lot of people don't realize the number of kids who are adopted out of foster care, which is part of foster care's stated aim, permanence, finding a permanent family. But a lot of those arrangements fall apart pretty quickly. That happened to Marianne. And I was really struck by the number of young people who reported some kind of experience with lockup, who also had broken adoptions. Really interesting area to research. The federal government didn't even systematically track failed adoptions from foster care until like 2010. It's pretty recent. The system has not publicly confronted those numbers.
Claudia, David, because of his experience, thinks because it's easy to give it back, to give an adopted child back, when things get difficult.
I think so many kids, including Marianne, including even myself, I didn't know. I think a lot of people don't know you can be unadopted. Like Marianne had no idea. She was shocked that even though she had given her adoptive family a lot of trouble, she scared them. But in many ways, I think she was testing them. How much do you love me? Right. And maybe not that much. I mean, they gave her back within 2 years.
Yeah, tell us why she was in jail, though. I mean, it was the story was incredible. At something that she did at 16.
Right. So Marianne was known as a chronic runner. And in fact, her last placement, after her adoption fell apart, and her adoptive parents had severed their legal responsibility for her. She was taken back into the system, placed in a new foster home with sort of a group home. It was not officially a group home, but there were about 6 teenage girls there. This was, in fact, her favorite placement. She loved that foster parent, and she loved the girls she was with, and yet she was a chronic runner. She ran from that placement all the time, often with one of the girls who was there with her. So they would hit the streets. And it was during one of those periods that she met up with the guy she eventually shot in the head. So she was on the run from her placement. A lot of questions about what this guy, who was an adult, yes, a young adult. He was 21. She was 16. If their ages had been slightly different, there might have been a statutory rape situation. But because she was 16 and she had been 16 for like 2 or 3 weeks, she was barely 16. That over the line date affected a lot of things with her case. She was automatically charged as an adult because she was 16 when she shot this guy. So because of her age and the seriousness of her crime, and that resulted in adult charges, adult sentence. Had she been 15, had it been a couple of weeks earlier, there
Hmm.
would have been a hearing to determine whether an adult charge was appropriate. Um,
Yeah.
Marianne's defense team attempted to make the argument that foster care and her experience in it, which was a really typical experience, about a half dozen placements, broken adoption, running, really standard stuff for a lot of adolescents. Her team was attempting to say foster care bears some responsibility for what she did. And even the judge, while sentencing her, rejecting their argument, but still said, yeah, mistakes were made. And that's in fact what he said. The state does bear some responsibility.
I think tying it to what we talk about a lot on this pod is poverty, right? And one statistic that is out pretty clear is that poverty is a feeder system into foster care. 2/3 of the kids entering the system are there for neglect,
Right.
which in many instances is about the parents not being able to take care of their kid. Talk a little bit about that kind of twin system of criminalizing poverty and how that leads to the outcomes you so beautifully exposed in this book.
There are no middle class kids in foster care. There are no affluent kids in foster care. We all know middle class or affluent kids who are abused or neglected. I do. Many of us do. It's not like these things don't happen in more affluent homes. It's sort of really about when I think when the system says neglect, they often mean material neglect, right? So affluent kids are going to have enough to eat. They're going to have a place to sleep, even though it might be less than ideal within their home. That is not what the system is addressing. The system is aimed squarely and entirely at poor kids, right or
Hmm.
wrong. That's the fact. I found a really interesting bit of data when I was researching the book that showed of all the families in Washington state who had kids in the foster care system, all of them were earning $40,000 a year or less. Most of them were getting by on $20,000 a year or less. Every family with a kid in the system. It's a little bit old. That's from the early 2000s. So those numbers would be, slightly higher now, but that I thought was really interesting. And I also found some fascinating data that showed in states that have implemented more restrictive welfare policies in more recent years, a dramatic spike in the number of referrals to foster care and intakes into foster care, like a 13% increase in foster care intakes in states that began implementing more restrictive welfare policies. So poverty inextricably tied in.
100%. And I think the idea of taking a kid out of the parent's custody because they can't make the bills and then spending six figures to keep the kid in the system
Right.
while putting the parent through the ringer and damaging the kid at the tail end is both economically and morally bankrupt. It doesn't make sense as a financial model to criminalize poverty that way. Never mind family. Breaking up families should be a coveted power of the state, and it seems we use it not sparingly enough, especially in communities that are hypervigilized. Like you mentioned, both economic, but often economics in our society is a proxy for race.
Yeah.
When you shake an apple tree, my sister says, she's a social worker, apples fall. And it's not that kids aren't experiencing poverty or aren't abused in these communities. It's that we're standing there rapidly shaking this tree, and then we're observing the apples fall while other trees stand around us unexamined. So maybe it's the metaphor went too far. We're now talking about applesauce, but I really appreciated the way you talk about the connection between income and outcomes.
Right. Congratulations on this book because, as many people, when we talk about child poverty and we see the unhoused living in David's town, LA, and here in New York, where I am, And people always say, well, where do all of these people come from? And, as you point out, it's the foster care system, so many of them. Now, you think that the foster care system needs to be held accountable, if I'm reading you correctly, that they've gotten away, in a sense, with all of these millions of people by now whose lives have been wrecked, in a sense, within this system. And, so talk to us about that in terms of accountability.
Yeah, when I think about foster care, really, what it really is a holding system, or you could say a housing system. It's a housing system for kids who can't theoretically be housed safely with their biological families. So it's a place where we, put a bed and a roof over a kid. That's essentially what foster care is. It's a housing system. I think that it needs to be reconceived, reimagined as a healing system, a therapeutic intervention, because every single kid in that system has experienced some kind of trauma, even simply by being taken into the system and, moved around, mostly with strangers. As you know, huge numbers of children in the foster care system are drugged, right? Their behavior is managed with cocktails of psychotropic drugs, anti-anxiety, antipsychotic, drugs to sleep, antidepressants, all drugs never formulated for use on children. But enormous numbers of kids, including the young people in my book, have been sort of monitored and modulated on drugs, for like their childhood, right? So if foster care, I thought it was really fascinating that every young person that I spoke to in the book, all of them had horrible experiences in foster care, and yet all of them said there needs to be some system. They were not abolitionists. They are all saying, yeah, they for the most part, I think all of them, could not be safe at home. They needed to be removed for various reasons, but yet none of them felt that the way foster care operates was working. And I think that the impermanence, even though foster care says its aim is permanence, reuniting or adoption, the reality of foster care is impermanence, is constantly moving from home to home to home, never forming any attachment really to anyone in the system, sort of actively encourages that. It discourages attachment, both structurally by moving kids around and like literally, explicitly. That, as you know, turns out to be really, really detrimental to mental health, to kids' healthy development. Their brains, all of our brains, like all people
Right.
to develop, need attachment. And this is why there are so many behavior problems among youth in foster care. And it goes to homelessness and incarceration.
Yeah, I love that you propose some solutions here.
Yes.
One is, David and I were talking about the sort of kinship care. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? That it had been prohibited that people who were related to a child could be paid to care for them. But do you think that this needs to be enhanced?
I don't think kinship care is a perfect miracle, but I think it's sort of the practice of the government giving family members, the foster care support that is typically given to strangers who take in kids. Now, really only in the last 5 years, as it really ramped up, where states around the country are increasingly allowing a relative, to become licensed as a foster parent just for their grandchild or niece or nephew, just for their relative. That is new. So instead of a grandma taking in her grandchildren, and sort of draining her retirement savings, which has been the practice for
Right.
Decades. Now state governments, particularly Washington state, is way out on this, is saying, yes, we will give that stipend to your grandparent, your aunt, to take
Yeah.
care of you, kid.
Mm.
So that's better. And it's fascinating that is seen as like, wow, revolutionary and new. But yeah, Carol, as you say, I think that the original thinking sort of on the part of state child welfare agencies was, oh, if your family is troubled,
They
your
should do
immediate
it.
family, like everyone you know, everyone, all your relatives are troubled too. Your grandmother
Yeah.
made that woman who abused you, right? Your own mother.
Yeah.
So why would we give you to your grandmother? Okay, I guess I could follow that logic, except that it doesn't take into account. I mean, the idea was sever that child's ugly past and plunk them down into this fresh new world with a stranger, as if kids don't have hearts or memories, right? This is not how people work. They have ties. Children have memories. They have ties. There's biological bonding. So I just think that did not take reality into account, like the reality of what it is to be human and human brain science. So kinship care, better. There are many models of, you know, many efforts now being tried that are better, like guaranteed basic income for kids who age out. That's, David, where you are in California. There's a pretty interesting pilot going on there. There are a lot of reforms. Quality Parenting Initiative is an effort also out of California to better recruit, train, and match foster parents with a child, sort of on the let's encourage a good connection, a good attachment. Let's have the foster parent not be just a babysitter way station, but actually a formative part of that kid's life, an intentional part of that kid's life.
I'm actually excited where we are collectively. We are trying new things. We're questioning assumptions. You know, jumping back to kin for a second, most foster kids go home. Most foster kids will go home, either during their adolescence or after they turn 18. They will go back to where they're from. And so this idea of permanently writing off family is just absurd, because that family ultimately is going to be the safety net for this kid, whether we like that or not. And then second, statistically, kids are better off with their family. Not necessarily the perpetrator of violence or neglect, but in general, their kin. And I think third, and I'm curious your take on this, we often talk about the system. And in my head, I'm picturing this blob of an alien from a movie that's out there somewhere, the system. When in reality, everyone listening to this and everyone that should listen to this is the system. We are Soylent Green. We are the system. We have to vote on this issue as if it matters, as if it's fundamental, because these kids are our kids. I'm just curious, how do you talk to folks about the system and get them to have any sense of responsibility? Is it statistics? How have you bridged that gap between people saying, those people that I have nothing to do with and the terrible work they're doing? How do you bridge that?
I wrote this book for people who don't know anything about foster care, exactly as you say, who think they don't know any kid in the system. They don't have kids in the system. They've never had any connection to the system, they think. However, anyone who pays taxes in this country is connected to foster care. We're spending $34 billion in the US on foster care every year. $34 billion for outcomes that are mostly homelessness and incarceration. You know, even more expensive systems. That's insane. So I make I connect to people two ways. Either it's through the stories of young people, really, they have power. Humans respond to stories. Like a real human living these realities forever will have power. It does have power. However, for those who go, oh yeah, those bad kids, those people with no empathy, they're sociopaths, whatever you want to say about kids who have any involvement with crime or homelessness, I will pivot and say, okay, if it's not a moral question for you, maybe it's a financial question. Do you want to spend $34 billion a year for a system that is channeling kids into locked cells and street homelessness? Is that a good return on investment? I will make that sort of dollars and cents arguments for people. But I hear you, David. We are at a moment. We're at like a powerful moment of this connect the dots thing is landing. This thing of, hey, foster care, which is almost like an invisible system because everyone in it is a minor, is powering these incredibly visible systems, homelessness and our carceral system, highly visible. This connect the dots thing, people get it now. Suddenly.
The relationship between economic security and physical health is one of the most important and unexplored areas in medicine today. Dr. Tiffany Younger is a clinical scientist and postdoctoral fellow at Yale Medical School, doing pioneering work at exactly that intersection.
Her research focuses in particular on Black women in America, looking at how wealth, stress, and health outcomes connect and what interventions could actually make a difference. So, Dr. Younger, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
The topic of Black women, very much in the news and in the public discourse, concern about Black women in the United States of America. And this is your research. Tell us, shouldn't be concerned.
We absolutely should be concerned. What we see right now is what I want to say, like a structural attack on Black women in jobs, Black women being able to take care of their families, and Black women being able to build wealth. So we should absolutely be concerned as a nation.
And when you say building wealth, what are you looking at? I know we know that you have so many degrees, so you're looking at it from an analytical data perspective, not just, this looks bad. It's that you're seeing the numbers.
Right now, Black women, well, let's start off with like 70% of Black women are sole or primary breadwinners of their household. So that means even when Black men or a spouse is there, Black women are 70% more likely to be the sole primary breadwinner. That impacts children, first of all, right? That impacts our community. The second thing is that Black women, when it comes to wealth, pennies on the dollar. Pennies on the dollar compared to white men, compared to even white women in some cases. And so when we think about wealth, we think about assets, we think about debt. We think about assets that contribute to your health. And debt, that doesn't take you out.
Right. And that is, I had in the women's rights field that I spent so much time in, whenever the equal pay day comes around, it drives me crazy. I kept saying, will you please stop? It hasn't changed, even by a penny, in year after year of calculating what a Black woman or a Latina woman or an Asian woman earns compared to a white man is what the standard, is of calculating income and wealth.
I'm happy that you said that. I don't like measuring gaps. I understand the importance of it. A lot of my colleagues and economists I respect greatly, they measure gaps because that's what we need to do in order to get the data out. But to your point, I'm interested in knowing what Black women want. That might not be what white men have.
Wow. Now there's a powerful. Please go on, Dr. Young.
Yeah, well, because this really started because of my research, and my research was really just asking Black women initially, like, what is wealth? It was supposed to be a quantitative data, which means that I was supposed to just get a survey, get the numbers. And what I ran into was they would ask me, what do you mean by wealth? And as a researcher and a scientist, that's problematic for me because if we are not having the same definitions of wealth as the measurements, it becomes extremely concerning. Because what are we quantifying if we are not aspiring for the thing that the economists are actually quantifying, right? So when I think about wealth, the wealth data oftentimes talks about home ownership. The wealth data often talks about entrepreneurship, stocks. Black women don't even play in the stock market the same way. And so those are like the top measurements that from my research, I've seen Black women not participate in.
Yeah, David, we let you into the conversation here. I think it's that definition of what are we talking about? What do we want?
That statement is just echoing in my head. I've really fascinated by the work that you do, and even more so the approach you take. You're not pathologizing the people you're studying. You involve them as partners, not subjects. And that's a really different way of doing science. And I was curious if you talk a little bit more about what does participatory research look like in your practice, and what do you think others can learn from it to kind of reveal more truths or information?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question, David, because it's absolutely not subject-based, right? So I love that you pointed that out. We don't see our participants as subjects, but as co-collaborators. I cannot do my job if they do not participate. because I understand my job is based off of researching with Black women, children with families, they are important. And I think that sometimes we take funders being the number one priority and not the actual people that we're engaging with research. And so I've had to learn how to shift the paradigm a little bit and like center the families, the Black women, even their children, right? Because oftentimes they're getting on the screen in focus groups, and they are with their kids in the back.
Ah,
Right. And even when we pay them $100, $150, they still don't have the capacity to stop and engage in a way that science would save me. Right.
wow.
So as a scientist, I'm like, I want to study people in their environment. I don't want to subject them to my environment, which is control.
Hmm. I mean, you said it. I would like to just delve in a little bit more. I mean, you teach at Columbia, at Hunter, at Penn. You have a daughter, and which all of this, as I understand it, means you're doing this work from inside the communities you're studying. And I'm just curious how that shapes your sense of urgency, and honestly, kind of what keeps you going. I mean, this is some hard study. This is some hard information, some hard systems that you're delving into. How does that shape your work, and how do you keep it? How do you keep yourself motivated and going?
Yeah. Thank you, Debbie. You did your research. And the biggest role I had was being a postdoc at Yale School of Medicine, which is like my full-time gig. And so I'm happy that you mentioned my teaching. Right? No, because I tell folks all the time, it is my commitment to train the next cohort, the next generation of researchers, of social workers, of practitioners. Like that is my job. Right. So even outside of the research, it is being committed to making sure that students understand the playing field a little bit. And so to answer your question, I think about to whom much is given, much is required. And we are in a tough time right now, right? It is so easy for me to go lay down and just be like, forget it. But I think
Mhm.
about my grandmother, who was a Black woman who raised grandchildren after her children died. She could have said, forget it. Right. She took 6 kids in after her 2 daughters died. One, me being one of them.
And you write about your life. You were uh, a child of a disrupted family, and you went through. I don't know whether it's defined as child poverty, but it's talk to us about that.
Yeah. And I tell people all the time, my research, my work comes from what I've experienced, and that's the first thing I come from. Everybody look at the fancy degrees. I was like, I don't say the same thing I was saying since I was little. Like, why I got figured out? Yummy, like same thing, just with fancy words, right? So, when I was 3 years old, my biological mother died, and she was 32 from a chronic illness. She had kidney issues, and I didn't, I think that subconsciously was what drove me. Um, her and my dad were married. My dad ended up leaving. He got addicted to drugs. He actually recently passed during COVID-19 from CPOD, and then he also contracted COVID. So he died. So I have 2 parents who have died, and me and my siblings, I have 2 older siblings. Now I think about where I am today. And I think people always talk about how smart I am. And I'm like, smartness is one factor, but if you don't have open doors, there's nowhere you can go. And so at an early age, I attracted a lot of mentors, right? Lawyers. I thought I wanted to be an attorney at one point. I don't. And so, 2 lawyers from Columbia University, which one ended up adopting me, my mom. She was a young Black woman in Harlem, and she was introduced to me. And she always says, I just fell in love with you because I only had boys. So she has 3 sons that she adopted you. And she took me in, adopted me. She has been instrumental in my life. She doesn't play about me. I think so I really didn't come out of you, right? I was having my baby. She we swore I came out of her. But very important that I think about those assets because there are young people back home where I'm from who were just as smart as me. I can name a few, if not smarter, who did well, who are still where they are. And I question, was it only hard work? Was it only intellect? You can't run on a treadmill and go anywhere if it's not moving. You have to have an
Mm,
open door. And so that is my commitment, and that's why I continue to do it.
wow.
So, talk to us about how Black women do define wealth. You found a difference.
Yeah, and interestingly, I tell people all the time, we still want our money, right? Like We still are owed recreations and we still want to be paid a living wage. But interestingly, what I found is that they define wealth as wellness, which is people always think money equals wellness. But after I did my research, I have had high paying earned women in some of my studies. I had women with wealth who said some of this income is toxic.
Right.
Like I'm working at a corporate America, they driving me crazy. I'd rather just work at home and make $40,000. So they are talking about that their wealth has to contribute to their wealth. It shouldn't deplete it.
Hmm.
One other thing is agency. That's about choice. And when people say, well, wealth will equal that. Again, not with structural racism, not with anti-gender, Black or racism. It doesn't equal choice. So even if you have high earning people, big assets, their choices are limited. They see it as community.
Wealth as community.
Wealth as like their community is healthy and well. Like most of them always talk about the neighbors, the family. It's never oftentimes only about them. They want to see people around them and their communities doing well. And so those are just some of the 3 top ones. And my research is really trying to dig in to say, well, what does that look like? Because I'm like, well, what would wellness look like? What would community look like? Because that's where I can come in and propose policy solutions.
Right. Well, Black maternal health would be one issue. And
Yes.
The death rates from every conceivable disease that are so much higher in our category than anywhere else.
One of my degrees is clinical epidemiology. And I remember during COVID-19, I was in what we call a T32 training program. And I worked with all physicians. So it's like me and like 17 physicians. They got called to the front line. And what I saw happen, because what we don't understand is that we contract chronic illnesses at such high rates. And what we focus on is food and diet. So we're trying to control behaviors. Like if you just eat better.
Right.
If you just work out. Right. I am those skinny, healthy women who have heart disease, who are Black women, who have all the education in the world. So is it true? What is actually happening to us? It's about weathering. It is the wear and tear of the stress on our bodies and our minds.
Right. So weathering is the term that, accounts for Black women dying earlier, being more susceptible to all kinds of diseases. It's the stress of racism and
Sexism.
Mm-hmm.
All the isms, right? Because if you think about folks within the LGBTQ community who also identify with being Black and also identify with being women, trans Black women, we think about class and you poor. Tupac said that, right? And you poor. Like, like all of that and you poor. And so all of those isms together. And I think people are always like, but like, how does it work? And I'm like, it's simple as I go into work and oftentimes people don't know that they're doing it, but the things that you expect of me as a Black are to take care of you and your feelings. Right. I'm like, my job is to do my job. And then I wonder, why didn't you go to Carter and ask him to do that? Why is it that you always feel comfortable with me taking care of your feelings? It's like this expectation. I don't want to seem harsh, but I want to think about if I have to carry the emotional load on top of the mental load at work, on top of all the other loads, there will be a wear and tear on my body, on our bodies, right? On our organs, on our, thinking about it. You go home and you think about it. I wake up in the morning when I used to work inside of nonprofit, I used to receive all of these emails about people not coming in, but they would be like such vivid, sad stories. And that's how I have to start my morning. Now, credit to them is that we don't have a system where you just say, I can't come in today. You got to give a long excuse. I would read these long excuses. And is your mom okay? Is the dog okay? That's what I was carrying before I went in.
You founded a project called Liberation for Us. And I think it's just a striking name for a research project. It really jumped out at me. I looked at kind of what you do, and I think liberation as a scientific framework is really interesting. And I was curious, why did you name it that way? It sort of speaks to what you're just talking about, but why does it matter how we name this kind of work?
Yeah, Liberation for Us is definitely a space where I collaborate with outside organizations to think of our research in a different way. I think I use my institutional knowledge at Yale to say, okay, let me help y'all and think about this. And to be quite frank, to also credit their research when it's community-based. We don't like to give community-based research credit in the way that we like to give other scientific research. And I mean deliberation for us because I'm like, when I'm talking about Black women, I'm talking about every single human being in this country. And if we are not free, you are not free. And if you understand the history of our country, they come for one, they come for all. Before we were even on this nation, poor white people were working and not making money. And then we went and got slaves, right? So like we are all attached. And so when I say liberation for us, it's that it's not only for Black women, it's that we start with Black women because we have the least amount of power, the least amount of capital, the least amount of everything. And when we could figure out what they need, we would all benefit from it because we'll get it. We'll get it. It's not just for them, it's for all of us.
The wealth gap in America is something most people haven't fully reckoned with, and closing it requires big creative thinking. One promising idea gaining serious traction: baby bonds, seeding a savings account for children born into low-income families, giving them a foundation to build on.
David Radcliffe at the New School's Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy has spent his career developing the research and the policy framework behind baby bonds. He's one of the leading voices making the case for why this could work.
David, you grew up in a small factory town in Appalachia, Pennsylvania, and now you're one of the leading architects of baby bonds, which we'll talk about. How does where you came from shape how you think about financial security for families, for individuals in this country?
Well, appreciate you all having me on, and it's a great question. And growing up, and I think it's true for many of us, we don't think about like our economic circumstances necessarily because we're just living our lives. And it didn't occur to me until I came to Connecticut after college when I reflected on my growing up. It was a small town, 2,000 people, factory town. And, things felt pretty good in the moment until the factory closed. And it was economically devastating, but also very hard on families and stressful. And I've come to appreciate that, money matters and having it matters more. And the effect that it can have on our relationships, on our families and communities can be profound. And, I've come to also appreciate that we get to choose. And this economy is not from outer space. It's something that we get to design, and the choices that we make can have an effect and for the better on the families that we love and support.
Just for our listeners who are hearing the phrase baby bonds for the first time, which sounds like a wrestler, talk a little bit about it. So Connecticut puts money into an account for babies. Talk us through what it is, who qualifies, and what the theory is.
Yeah, baby bonds, they are publicly funded and managed trust accounts. And in the example that you noted here in Connecticut, we're the first state in the country to have this program. And what it means is that if your birth is covered by Medicaid, and in this state, that means a family of three, it's an income of about $37,000 a year. That's about $700 a week. You are automatically enrolled in a baby bond. And so the state of Connecticut puts in $3,200. That's managed and invested by the state treasurer, and with interest earnings that grows between $11,000 and $20,000. And you can use it then for one of four wealth building activities: to buy a home in the state, to start or invest in a business, to put it in retirement, or towards hopefully debt-free post-secondary experience.
So, David, I like to think of you as the father, the dad of baby bonds, because you helped Connecticut get it. You understand it, and I think that there are something like 20 other states who are attempting it, but Connecticut is still the only state that's actually put it into place, and that was 2023. So, tell us about who's in it and how it's working.
Yeah, and to be fair, there are many moms and dads and others help bring this to life. So
In my heart, though, you're the dad.
right,
Yeah.
that's very generous. But yeah, I mean, it's a lesson though too that it's one thing to have a good idea, but often to bring it to life, it takes a team. And there was a great case study in Connecticut on what actually helped get it from an academic idea, which is created by economist Eric Hamilton, and to actually have it become legislative policy where the resources are benefiting real young people who are being born every day. And it's still a new program. It'll have its 3-year anniversary this July 1st. And by then, about 50,000 babies will
Wow.
automatically receive their baby pod. And now the actual the distribution won't take place until that young person turns 18. But we are also knowing and seeing, and the evidence is compelling that even just knowing that resource will be there for you can change in the nearer term one sense of optimism and hopefulness and future planning, and can also lead to better maternal and health outcomes, and also for the young people.
So the use of the bonds can be for many things, for education and also for buying a home. Because I think as I look at the statistics, the difference in the wealth gap between those who have and those who have not is usually home ownership. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and you've teed up nicely this notion that we often think of how important income is, and it is essential. Like, to afford our lives, to be able to get through the day, we need a flow of resources into our homes so we can, eat and pay the utility bills and so forth. And in this time where affordability is so top of mind, income is a thing, and we need to do better at that. And I know in a previous episode, you had a guest, Holly Fogel, who talked about her incredibly important work, the Bridge Project, that provides direct cash, invests direct cash in folks who are struggling to make ends meet. And so that's income, with the flow of resources. Wealth is another dimension that we don't always think about. And when I talk about wealth, it's not necessarily being able to buy a helicopter or having a swimming pool, though that can sometimes be what the public sees. But wealth really is having a stock of resources. It's like a reserve, so that I can afford a down payment on a home, or I can weather an economic shock or a pandemic, or to choose the community that I live in. So whereas income is a flow, wealth is a stock. And that's what baby bonds it does in terms of policy perspective. It democratizes wealth for those who may not have the benefit of an inheritance or a trust account.
I think the distinction between wealth and income is so important, and not just to purchase things, but to survive unexpected things, the pandemic or an illness in the family, or some sort of crisis. When you think about kind of long-term thinking, I've always described poverty as, the inability to think long-term, because you're sort of just needing to survive the moment. So how do you kind of talk about this when you're facing a population that may have more immediate needs? How do you justify it in a policy perspective when there never seems to be enough to deal with the immediacy of the needs? How have you articulated that for folks?
That was a great question, and it does come up with legislators and budget setters who represent constituents, and constituents are us and our neighbors, folks, as you note, who are just trying to afford their lives, just to be able to get by at the very least. The opportunity really is to recognize that we need to do more to help folks in the near term. We want and deserve affordable, quality early care and education for our children, or housing, quality and affordable health care, all the things that we need to have a full life. Oftentimes, though, that's the floor. Those are basics. Those are rights that we are entitled to and have earned. But if we are always on the treadmill of just helping people get by, and when I say we, that's us, our electeds, our communities, then we will forever be just on that treadmill, just helping to get by. And the
Right.
difference maker, to our way of thinking, is that it's access to capital is the difference maker. And if we can do both, and we can, because we saw it during the pandemic, where we were able to help folks get by with direct cash distributions from the government to provide wages, to help with healthcare and so forth. But additionally, to be able to provide seed capital for those who aren't born with it, unlocks opportunity in our economy in ways that just income and getting by alone won't.
I also think it's a great policy because the public investment today of $1 turns into $3. So the money we're putting forward at a lower level becomes something much more impactful as the kids age, which doesn't cost us anything. So it's a great ROI, return on investment, for the public dollar when you're able to have that impact at the higher level for a much lower cost. and combined with other programs like affordable education or access to healthcare, you really do interrupt the cycle of poverty that is our birthright if you're born into poverty in this country. It's a innovative way, I think, to maximize our public dollar and investment. And I've seen that push and pull of like, do we fund the immediate need or do we think long term? And the critical thing in this country is we can do both. We can do both. We don't have to choose. People are worth the investment. I think that is a false choice, and I think you've spoken to the answer to it. But the reality, I think, in this country, the richest country on earth, is we don't have to choose. We can do both.
Yeah, David, talk to us about Vermont, because to me, that gives me the most hope, working with Holly Fogel and the Bridge Project in Vermont and doing many things, the guaranteed income as well as diapers. And tell us about the prospect of that approach, which takes care of the long range as well as the immediate needs.
Yeah, right on. And you mentioned earlier, since Connecticut passed and funded the first state baby bond program in the country, 20 other states have either introduced or seriously considering baby bond legislation. There are also 10 different pilot projects that have popped up in 9 different states, red, blue, and purple. So this is bipartisan. And the innovation that we're seeing at the pilot level on the way towards eventual public policy, both at the state and federal level eventually, we're seeing in STARS in Vermont. And, started with an effort led by the state treasurer to develop a baby bond program, sort of the Connecticut style. Recognize through feedback from community and elected leaders, and to your point in this conversation, that this is great, but baby bond, the capital for tomorrow, doesn't put food on the table today. It doesn't pay the light bill and so forth. Folks are struggling in the moment. What could we do to sort of blend together people-focused investments so we can get traction both in the longer term and also in the nearer term? So the Vermont Baby Bond Maternal Health Super Bundle, it has 4 elements, and one could imagine why stop with 4? But the core 4, you might say, includes a baby bonds. So $3,200 invested by the state with interest earnings gets to that $10,000 to $20,000 threshold. So meaningful seed capital at young adulthood. It also adds direct cash, which is being developed and designed through the Bridge Project, along with some local partners. That'll provide resources in those stressful and expensive early months after birth of a child. Also adds direct material support in the form of diapers. And diaper insecurity is a big deal, not just for the mother and infant, but it's stressful and anxiety provoking and can constrain a family's ability to get back into the workforce, to have a child go to childcare. And the 4th dimension is maternal health supports. So this evidence-based intervention called the Moms Partnership through Yale is providing, will be providing when it launches later this year, those essential maternal health supports in the early months.
I love it. And I'm with you. I stop at 4, but that's a very good 4. Speaking of 4, on July 4th, the Trump accounts become available to citizens in this country. Talk to us about what it is and what it isn't.
Sure. So Trump accounts are a new program that came from the HR 1 federal bill that passed last year. And what they are is an investment vehicle that seeds those who apply for accounts $1,000 from the federal government, and then allows upwards of $5,000 annually from family members, employers, philanthropy, etc. So that's interesting because it has really opened up the conversation that wealth matters in America, and it's an important conversation within our policy domains, and that the federal government has a role to do something about it. The challenge, and there are a number of them with the Trump accounts, they're also called 530As, which is sort of where they nest in the IRS tax code, like a 529 college savings plan, 401ks. Those numbers represent where they sit in tax code. So 530As are in their current form opt-in. So the family has to proactively apply to have an account opened. They're also not available to everyone. It does require a social security number. And for mixed status families, that could be a challenge or barrier to participate. And I think one of the overriding biggest challenges with the 530A accounts is that And there is a place for them. There's no doubt about it. But the real power of them comes from a family's ability to contribute to them. And as much as all of us would love to be able to do that, many of us, nearly half of Americans, are not able to afford life in the moment. So relying on outside contributions from philanthropy, from employers, could be helpful for those who are able to do that. But in many ways, this will make the wealth gap in America worse, because those who have the means to contribute will, those who don't won't be able to.
Nearly half of college students across America are dealing with food insecurity, struggling to keep up with their studies while also struggling to find the next meal.
Campuses around the country are stepping up with creative responses and resources. And one of the most effective is right there in New York. Student Katherine Ames helps run the Purple Apron Pantry at Hunter College, a model other schools are starting to follow.
Kat, thanks so much for inviting us into your domain. David and I love the work you're doing.
Thank you for inviting me. I love talking about this place.
I know you do. And David says that he's, when he was in college, he had experience with some of the work you're doing. How so, David?
I think most people, when they think of a college student, don't really consider that they may not have access to food for whatever reason. They have sacrificed everything to be there. So when I was in college, there was issues around where I would sleep during the holidays. And when the meal value of the meal card ran out, where would I get food? So when I learned about this, I just thought this was just my mom used to say the cat's meow, which was a good thing. Just a really positive program meeting in invisible need, which is what we're all about, right? So I loved learning about it, Kat.
Yeah. And we were interested to know how exactly you came to do this. You're very committed, and everybody considers you to be the leader, in charge of this particular effort.
I am a very curious person by nature. So my first semester here, I'm a transfer student. So I have a degree in fine arts. I studied at the American Academy first here in New York City. And then I worked for a while and decided that I wanted to come back for a secondary degree. So when I came here, Hunter, my mother is an alum, so it just sort of made sense. And while I was here this first semester, I was getting my bearings. I was doing a little snooping, and I found this hidden door in the basement of the West Building. I walked inside, and there was a very nice young lady who was sitting at the desk, and I asked her what this place was, and she said, "This is a pantry." And I volunteered. I was here maybe twice a week helping out, just restocking shelves and getting to know how this place ran. And then the young lady who was here was actually graduating, and she said that she enjoyed my company and that she really appreciated how much effort I put into volunteering here, that she offered me her position. So that is how I came to be here.
That is
That's why
terrific.
people avoid doors, Kat. You walk through.
Yeah.
I know, that is so great that you discovered it. And one of the beauties about your pantry is that it's open 6 days a week.
It is. We are open 6 days a week. And I believe it's a day later than all the other pantries that are affiliated with CUNY. Something else that we do differently from the other pantries is that we offer our services to not just our Hunter students, but to the community at large, all of CUNY. So if you go to Baruch, you can come here. If you go to John Jay, you can come here. Also, in terms of our schedule, our people are here once a day, every day that the pantry is open, which is very different from some of these other places that you have to make a schedule with them. And so we're a little bit different.
If someone comes in, what does a visit look like for them? Because I understand there's no income test, there's no paperwork. This is
absolutely not
a little bit shocking here. So just tell us what it's like when you walk in there and need help.
So for us, we do have everybody sign in, but that's really just for us to collect data. We want to make sure that we can tell the higher ups that we are indeed in need and that they should keep funding us. So they'll come here, they'll sign in, and then they're actually offered reusable bags. We are trying to transition into more sustainability here down in the pantry. So we offer reusable bags for them to do their own shopping. And we like the idea of autonomy. So they come in, they do their shopping, and then once they're done, they come here and we do a bag check, but that's just to make sure that everything is kept fair. And then they're on their way. It's actually quite simple.
And so available, that same student can come every day if he or she needs to.
Absolutely. So part of the reason is because we do get one large shipment a week. And so we have to make that last. So let's say they come on a Monday in the middle of the afternoon. We've been open since 9 o'clock in the morning. We may not have everything that we had at the beginning of the day. So we want to offer them the chance to come back the next day and grab whatever it is that they're missing.
Wow. I was reading some of the background on food insecurity with students, and one thing that stuck out to me was that students that are experiencing food insecurity or hunger have a meaningfully lower GPA and
Absolutely.
a 40% lower chance of graduating. I wonder how that tracks with the reality of what you see in the work that you do.
I would say that we get about roughly 30 students a day, depending on the day. And I've heard stories, and I think part of the charm of the pantry is that people do feel safe enough to disclose why it is they are using the pantry. And a lot of it is because they come from homes where mom and dad are also working, or they're dorming and there is no mom and dad. And so their need to be self-sufficient is high. And so, as we all know, the prices of groceries very high, and for college students who are probably primarily going to school and not working a full-time job, cannot afford these same prices, to grab milk and cereal and such and such. So for us to be able to provide that, it's really important. But it does say something when we see the same faces over and over again. It just reinforces the unfortunate idea that we are in a food crisis. It is just what it is at this point in time, and it's very sad. But we're very grateful that we can be here and be of assistance.
Right, and we can probably guess that some of your shoppers are actually unhoused as well as food insecure. And CUNY, there are 26 pantries that they've set up throughout the university, which is, tremendous. And I believe the income level, for most families is on the lower side. I think below the $30,000. So to get to college is really, really, it's such an achievement.
Yes.
Families may not be able then to provide everything else that the student needs. And as David says, dropping out, under that kind of stress is really, a
Correct.
possibility.
Absolutely. I like to think of it as the same thing as like lunch programs for public school, right? We want our students to be fed so that they're not worried about, their tummies being empty during the day. I don't know about you, but if I don't eat throughout the entire day, I am very upset. I'm not focused on my studies. I'm not focused on doing well on that test. I'm worried and I'm it's uncomfortable, and nobody be uncomfortable in that way.
So can you give us a little bit of a tour? What's available to the students today?
We did receive our shipment yesterday. And like I said, because we have to make sure that everything lasts, we distribute sporadically throughout the day. We did do a little bit of a restock yesterday, but I was open a little bit this morning, so we had some visitors early. And so we'll get things like milk and juice. We'll get shelf-stable items like soup and beans. We also have a lot of the packaged things as well, which is really great. Our students really love that. Hunter does have a high Muslim population, so we do have a halal fridge, and we do have a kosher and non-halal fridge. We want to be able to make sure that everybody has accessibility to this place. We do a lot of it's canned, a lot of canned things, veggies, fruits, the items that you'd spend a lot of money on, like oils and things like that. We have that here, so they don't have to worry about it. We also get things like paper towels and toilet paper and other household goods. On a really good day, we'll get things like pet food, and I can't tell you how many students come here asking the pet food. Thankfully, because we have two private donors, we have the Carol and Milton Petrie Foundation who gives to us, and we also have the Mildred Alpern Fund. We're able to get things like fresh produce bags and eggs every Monday and Tuesday. We weren't able to do that at the beginning, so we're very grateful for those kinds of donations to us, and so are the students.
But you operate on a budget, and Hunter sets aside, X amount of dollars to buy these items for you, and it comes through the New York City Food Bank. Is that
Correct. So, we have a budget. I don't know if you knew, but this week we had our first ever giving day.
Mm.
The goal was to reach $500,000 from 500 donors. I am really proud to say that our department received matching funds, and so we won one of these challenges, which is
Great.
just spectacular. It's spectacular. I can't tell you. But yeah, so through these donations, we are able to do things that we weren't able to do at the beginning. When we first opened up, it was 1 or 2 deliveries a month, and now it's once a week, which is really, really lovely.
It's great. I was looking for ramen noodles on that shelf and other, super important products. You said you stumbled upon the purple door, so to speak. How would you recommend other students who might want to duplicate this at their campuses? I'm sort of curious. And for our listeners and watchers who are not New Yorkers, what is CUNY? And then any advice to folks who may want to do this where they are in their community, in their educational institution?
I'd like to talk on how to sort of replicate this, because I think it really requires openness and a willing to invite. It's really like about creating community within community. So yes, I stumbled upon this door, but I made friends with the person who was sitting here. I carved out time to be here. And because of that, when I took over, the volunteers that were volunteering with me stayed. And we created a new set of volunteers. I went from 3 volunteers when I took this position to 18, because this place is really important. And I invited as many people as they wanted to come to be part of this, because it's really important that we show that this place has no stigma. Anybody can come here.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about the color of your skin. It's not about your gender. It's about your need. Can we help you? Please come here. And you can see the diversity that we have here. It's really quite lovely.
Keep up the good work. We are so glad that you are there, that the pantry is there, and that the students are utilizing it. Thanks so much. And thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for letting me be here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for being with us. Be sure to check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
You can also find more information about our guests, and we have show notes and all of that, and about the podcast and the other events and volunteering that we're doing on our website, theinvisibleamericans.com. Thanks for being with us today. We will see you the next time.